Today, I'm sharing a special bonus episode featuring an interview with a fellow podcaster, Stephanie Tinsley. She's always been a fan of true crime, and after finding a case she felt she could really sink her teeth into, she put together a creative team and got to work. Her show, Everything They Missed, launched in September, with 7 episodes available now and more forthcoming. Here's a synopsis for the show. It starts with a name whispered in an interrogation room, scribbled into police reports, passed along like an absolute that seemed to solve everything, too neatly, too quickly. Then it was a truck, a checkbook, fingerprints, suspects, lies. Like a deadly game of Clue, the very pieces you'd expect to matter most were the ones that slipped between the cracks. And in August 2007, when Danny Harris, a father, veteran, and lifelong Tennessean, was found brutally murdered inside his Memphis apartment, the case faded into silence. A story the public never truly heard until now. From Stephtown Studios, host Stephanie Tinsley has spent the past year retracing these pieces, talking to unheard voices, convincing people to come forward, and bringing to light everything they missed. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day, but all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 163, Interview with Stephanie Tinsley, host and creator of Everything They Missed. Stephanie Tinsley is a Nashville native with a sharp mind for high-stakes strategy honed through years in trial law, venture capital, and private equity. But in 2022, her world shifted when her family became entangled in the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial, one of the most notorious cases in recent history. That experience ignited something deeper than fascination. It sparked a mission. Inspired by this experience, Stephanie knew she had stories to tell and the skills to tell them. Her quest led her to the Tennessee Innocence Project, where she earned the trust of attorneys and was granted rare exclusive access to an ongoing case in Memphis, Tennessee. What began as a passion project quickly became something more, a dangerous boots-on-the-ground investigation that uncovered new information. With persistence and a fearless drive for truth, Stephanie's reporting could help turn a cold case upside down and force open a 15-year-old investigation that many would rather forget. So, hello, Stephanie, and welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited. I guess to start off, I'd love to know, as I like to ask most people, how did you first become interested in true crime?
Oh, that's such a good question. It started really early for me, and I didn't even know it. In the 80s, I would spend the summers with my aunt, and she's this beautiful old Southern woman. Her name is Elwanda, very Southern. I would spend summers with my aunt, and she would read true crime books. So I was exposed at an early age watching her read these true crime novels. And this was way before TV shows or certainly podcasts, because it was back in the 80s. But that was my first exposure to it. And then in the late 80s, I don't think the show is on anymore. It was called City Confidential.
Oh, I love
It
that
was
show.
one of my favorites. And I think what I love so much about it is they really brought in the city that it was in, like they personified the city and then got into the crime. Very early, that captured me because I wanted to know. I'm not sure what about true crime it is that I love so much, but I definitely love the stories behind it. And so that show immediately captured me. And then it was, Dateline came out in 1999, and I have seen every Dateline and 48 Hours in 2020. It was just, a regular Friday night sitting on the couch with a pint of ice cream. That was always my Friday night. So I just grew up loving true crime and not really knowing why. I just enjoyed it so much. When COVID hit in 2020, I found myself listening to a lot of true crime podcasts, and I'd never listened to true crime podcasts before. So when I heard Serial, and which is like the original, and S-Town, that's when I saw there's storytelling. It kind of blurred the lines between news and telling a story. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with it. And then there's something about the audio of it that just really captures. I want to know who it is. And I love hearing them, and I love hearing people walk up to the doors and the doors slam. So it just really evolved over time from books to TV shows to podcasts.
Yeah, that's kind of the same trajectory I had. I mean, really, right down to the Anne Rule books that I was
Yeah.
reading in high school, and I liked watching City Confidential too, and also that show American Justice. Do you remember that one?
Oh gosh, yes. They
The
still
theme
have
song for
reruns.
that show was so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved American Justice, City Confidential, Unsolved Mysteries, all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, for any of our listeners who think your name might sound familiar, could you discuss your own personal involvement in a national murder case that occurred prior to starting up your own podcast?
Absolutely. So all of the Carolina listeners are going to know the Alex Murdaugh, but really people across the nation and actually people all over the world. I had an interview last week with somebody from London, and London was obsessed with the Alex Murdaugh trial. So my husband is Mark Tinsley. Mark and I met in 2020. We were both I was divorced about 5 years. He had been divorced about 3 years. And we met and quickly fell in love. Mark at that time was the attorney for Mallory Beach's family. And so for those that remember, Mallory Beach was the beautiful young woman that was killed in the boat crash, and Paul Murdaugh was driving the boat. Mark filed a lawsuit against Alex Murdaugh, and I say Alex instead of Alec. Um, because I believe
It's a
that
tongue twister.
it's a tongue twister, and also Alex, his friends and family call him Alec, and I feel like I'm not his friend or his family, so I call him Alex. But Mark had filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Beaches, against Alex Murdaugh and his wife Maggie. And now we know years later that this lawsuit, which was going to uncover Alex's financial records, which would uncover his financial crimes, was most likely the motive for the murders of Paul and Maggie. So Mark, his name has been in the headlines associated with the Beach lawsuit and with the Alex Murdaugh trial, and he testified at Alex's trial. He was in the Netflix documentary about the Murdaugh murders, and he's been in most recently the Hulu TV show Murdaugh: Death in the Family. There's an actor that plays Mark, which is very surreal to have an actor playing your husband. That's how people would know my name and Mark's name.
How did he like his the portrayal of his character? And I mean, I don't know if you watched it. It was pretty
Oh, we watched it.
sensationalized,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Mark is a very humble guy. He's very quiet about his opinion on things, but we did talk about it. And what he loved so much is the actor Tommy Dewey that plays him talked to Mark quite a bit to understand him as a man and as a person and his life. So we were on set for the filming of the Watermelon Festival. I believe it was episode 4. It was really touching to see how much the producers, the directors, the actors really studied and really wanted to get it right. Even the extras that were at the Watermelon Festival. It was very touching to see how everybody really wanted to get it right. And so Mark really appreciated that.
did they film that scene in Hampton?
No, they filmed it in Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Oh,
So, yeah, so many things are filmed in Georgia now, but it was wonderful because, of course, Stone Mountain is right outside of Atlanta, and Atlanta people knew the Murdaugh murders very well. So most of the extras that we ran across knew who we were, knew who Mark was, and they really wanted to make a point to ask about the Beaches, to ask about Stephen Smith, to ask about Buster. And they really wanted to make a point that they were happy that they were representing Hampton County. So it was very touching to be there on the set. I was very happy that we got to experience that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more unusual things about this whole case is that there were so many victims involved in it that the even just the bystander, the podcast listeners, the people watching the documentaries, they feel a personal connection to these victims because they could be any one of us.
That's right.
And they went through a lot. Every single victim that was affected by, whether it was Alec or Paul. And I think that people just really felt a human connection to this case. And that's probably why people were being so genuine to you guys, because, I'm sure that was very touching for you guys.
It really was. It really was. Yeah.
Okay, so prior to podcasting, you worked in the corporate world. What made you decide to make the leap from that industry into investigative journalism?
Well, it was not planned. I had worked in the corporate world. I called myself, I was a should woman for a very long time, because I felt like, I'd gone to college, that I should move to Nashville because it was close to where my parents lived. I should get a corporate job because, that's what I should be doing. And I was in finance for a very long time, which is kind of a broad swath, but specifically, I worked in venture capital and I worked with startup companies, raising money for startup companies, seed money. Little did I know that experience of being in front of people and pitching ideas would work very well and translate very well into what I was doing, because everything I was doing involved people and being in front of people and gaining people's trust. When you're sitting in front of someone pitching a startup company and asking for $500,000, you have to get the person in front of you very comfortable with you. And you have to learn at a very quick speed what the company you're pitching is about. So I had been living this life for, a decade, where I had studied body language for a very long time. There was someone in Nashville that trains the FBI in body language. And I would go to some of his seminars and learn body language, because in what I was doing, it was very important to me to make people feel comfortable with me. If I'm sitting in front of you trying to get you to make, this large investment, I need you with your arms unfolded, with you, sitting back and listening to what I'm saying. And if you're doing this and, your listeners can't see what I'm doing, but I'm touching my face or I'm looking uncomfortable, I need to get you here and open. And so I studied body language for a very long time, which would translate very well into what I ended up doing. But investigative journalism never, ever crossed my mind. Never. My mother was a writer and an English teacher. My father was a lawyer. And my mother wrote for our local newspaper, but this was a little town of 20,000 people. So I had never thought that that was going to be something I would do. What made that transition is during the Murdaugh trial, during all of the events surrounding it, there was just this media firestorm that descended on our house. Mark was asked constantly for interviews. Netflix filmed at our house and Mark's office for 6 months. They filmed our wedding reception. I mean, they were all in the beginnings of Mark and I's relationship. And throughout that, it's this dual role of, I'm being a supportive wife to Mark, but I'm also still this true crime fan and watching how my favorite stories are made. So I didn't know what a director was or what a producer was. I didn't know that to make one Dateline show, you film for hours, you interview for hours, but you have to whittle it down to 42 minutes. So I was getting exposed to top-notch producers. And then I was also getting exposed to some really terrible journalists that were not prepared, that I would hear them interviewing Mark, or I'd hear them asking victims questions to later be reported and they would get it wrong, or I would feel like they were re-victimizing people. And not knowing, in my head, I was kind of making a plan of I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if later when I decide, because I had stopped working when I married Mark because I wanted to be by his side during the trial. So I knew I was going to take about a year off from work. And when it was time for me to go back to work, I couldn't imagine going back to a desk job. And I told myself that I'd give myself about 6 months to try to do a true crime podcast, because it just was in the back of my head watching all these folks. I wonder if I could do it. So I took that leap and decided I would try it. And I'm really glad that I did.
It's worked out well for you, it seems like.
It has. And I still wouldn't call myself an investigative journalist because I just feel like there's so many, and like you're a beautifully trained writer. I don't consider myself any of that. It's my very first podcast. I'd never done any kind of investigation before, but looking back and looking at the whole scope of work, definitely you could call me a private investigator. You definitely could call me a journalist, but it was not planned.
Yeah, so in the first episode of Everything They Missed, you take the listeners through the shocking discovery of the deceased body of a man living in Memphis, 55-year-old Danny Harris. I'd love to know how you first learned about this case and what made you think it would make a great podcast topic.
So when I decided that I wanted to do a podcast, I knew a few things. I didn't want it to be about Murdaugh. And I wanted it to be in my home state of Tennessee. I wanted it to be completely separate from anything that had to do with Murdaugh. So I had set a few conditions on myself. I wanted a story to find me. I didn't want to force it. I wanted it to be something that had meat on the bone that I could kind of dig into. One day my son gets in the car, and if anybody has teenage sons, we all know they don't talk. They do not talk. They're not chit-chatty. And my son, who was 13 at the time, got in the car and said, "Hey, my friend Lucy got up during the school assembly and was talking about her dad." And he proceeded to tell me about Jason Gishner, who was an attorney. And for those who haven't heard my podcast yet, I won't spoil exactly who Jason Gishner is. But as my son talked about Jason's work, I thought that sounds fascinating. And I went to visit him at his office. And when he told me about a few cases that he was working on, he told me about this one, Andrew Hayes. What stuck out so much to me was how passionate he was about it. He had played some audio for me associated with his investigation. And we all know podcasting is all about the audio. And you hear this particular audio at the very beginning of the podcast, the top of episode 1. And when I heard this woman's voice and Jason had laid out this entire case for me, I knew that I had to find who was on the other end of that voice. Could I find this person, this woman? So I immediately was hooked. Unfortunately, Jason said, "Well, this is an open case, so I'm not sure that I'm going to let you do it." And he asked if I would sign an agreement that he could shut it down at any time. Because if anything that I was reporting on or finding affected Andrew's chances of getting out of prison, because in his eyes, what he was telling me is Andrew Hayes has been wrongfully convicted. And Jason was nervous that I might uncover something or report something that could interfere with Andrew's case. And I didn't want to do that. So I started off on this journey just on a hope and a prayer that he wouldn't shut it down. And about 4 months into the show, he shut it down. There were some things that happened and he shut it down. And thankfully, I was able to resume with everything. And, you hear how it's turned out.
So I'm guessing the shutting of it down was when the private investigator came in, just to not give too much away.
No. That was much later. So he shut it down. So there was a hearing that he had to speak on Andrew's behalf, and he was asking. I mean, now that we know that he was believed Andrew was wrongfully convicted. He was asking for a new trial,
Mhm.
and the judge dismissed a hearing, said he couldn't even come. Andrew couldn't even have a hearing. Jason was so upset by that and had to regroup, and they had to re-strategize, that he just said, to me, there's nothing that you can report on right now. But I knew there was. And so my sneaky plan was I put together a trailer for him, an audio trailer. In the industry, they call it a sizzle reel. I didn't even know
Mhm.
what that was, what I was doing. But what I was doing is showing him, this is how I want to tell this story. And he heard that, and he heard the level of production that I had put into it. And he heard it, and I mean, I texted it to him, and within 5 minutes, he said, "Green light, go ahead with it." Right, I can tell, Stephanie, that you're gonna be very sad if you've worked very hard, and I had put together a really killer team, and I was doing all of the investigating on my own, but I had hired, a really strong team to help me with the editing and the sound design, and
Yeah.
I think that immediately captured him, was the level of sound design and care.
It makes a big difference, it
It
really does.
does. It does.
So what were some of the things that stood out to you when you first learned about Andrew Hayes and how he was implicated in Danny's murder, and how he was interrogated?
Yeah. So Andrew Hayes at the time was 24 years old. He's a black man in Memphis, Tennessee. Jason had told me almost immediately that Andrew has a 62 IQ, which is equivalent to a third grader. Andrew had He wasn't a suspect, he wasn't a witness. He was simply giving 2 women a ride to the station. He didn't even have to be there. But because of a name mix-up, they had heard the name Wayne previously. Andrew's middle name is Wayne. They pulled him back for an interview. What I learned, the difference in an interview and an interrogation, is Andrew was acting nervous because of his low IQ. Authority figures make a lot of people nervous that have diminished mental capabilities. So he hadn't ever been around police. He'd never been arrested. He'd never been in trouble with the law, but he was very intimidated by them. So he started acting a little fidgety and nervous. So they read him his Miranda rights. He didn't know what Miranda rights were, so he waived them. That's when it goes from an interview to an interrogation. The Memphis, in the state of Tennessee, does not require interrogations to be recorded, which is beyond to me. I can't believe that in this day and age, we don't have to record interrogations. I was immediately struck that his interrogation wasn't recorded, and it went from immediately into a 27-hour, which to me is unbelievable that anybody can be interrogated for 27 hours. Very poorly documented, and it was just this team of detectives that were kind of like tag teaming him. So Andrew never had a chance. He never had a chance. He didn't comprehend what was happening to him. He didn't understand that he could ask for a lawyer. The big thing that some people don't know, I didn't know going into it, when you waive your Miranda rights, the police are allowed to lie to you. Telling Andrew, your DNA is there, your fingerprints are there, we have eyewitnesses. And for the first several hours, you can combat that. You can say, no, you don't, no, you don't. By your 10th hour, by your 15th hour, by your 20th hour, even the strongest among us, I can't even imagine. I've talked to Amanda Knox, and she's a very intelligent woman. And the same thing happened to her, the same type of interrogation technique. So by the 27th hour, Andrew had broke. And he had just was pleading with them, "What do I need to say? Tell me how I can go home." And the police said, tell us what we want to hear, and you can go home." And he believed that. So he had been shown crime scene photos, and he tailored a confession based on the crime scene photos. What we know now is the 3 things that he confessed to don't even exist. So his confession matched zero evidence at the scene.
Yeah, basically what I was asking is, if you look at a record of the interrogation, is it just based on what the officer wrote down after the fact said happened?
Yes.
Because so you're just depending on what he says happened, and there's no audio or video recording of what Andrew went through.
Correct.
Yeah, that's wild
But
to
they
me.
recorded other suspects, didn't record Andrew. Tammy Vance, they recorded her the evening before. They were man. Now I'm not sure if race has anything to do with it, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, people.
It shows that they had the equipment and they could have done it.
That's right.
And he was in there long enough for somebody to go get a video camera. I mean, 27 hours, somebody could have gone down the hall and gotten a video camera and brought it back in.
That's right.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, in my years of writing about true crime, especially here in the South, I've noticed female perpetrators often get treated differently by investigators and the court systems. Do you think that may have played a factor in this investigation of Danny's murder?
I do. And it may not be the classic reason that we think. Sometimes I'd mentioned Amanda Knox. Sometimes I see in true crime or in crimes that women's beauty can be weaponized, women's professions can be weaponized. She was a librarian and, they somehow weaponize that, or she was a prostitute and they weaponize that. In this case, I believe Sarah Lucas is when you ask the Tennessee Innocence Project who their evidence points toward, it points toward a woman named Sarah Lucas. Sarah was brought in. The first time she was interviewed, she lied. When they caught her in a lie, they brought her in for a second interview. And these are major lies. She was caught pawning Danny's stolen property. Her fingerprints were on his checkbook. There were lots of things that were at least pointing to Sarah for her to be questioned more. But after Andrew confessed, they stopped investigating anything and they let Sarah go. They had later waived, she had drug charges and prostitution charges. They had waived those charges to get her back to testify in court. And she was not a well-off woman. And probably by her own accord, she would have shown up in whatever street clothes she had. But they dressed her up like she was going to church. She had on a nice dress. They put glasses on her, did her hair. And I do think that that they had used her as a woman, perhaps to, put more of the heat on Andrew. Is it easier to say that this man was killed by a Black man versus a woman? Is it easier for a jury to stomach that? So, yeah, I think that was an issue.
Especially when you hear the very violent way that Danny was murdered. Most of us we would picture a man resorting to that level of violence. That, when people listen to the podcast, they will hear the details of what exactly happened to him. And that is not something you would think of a woman doing. So I can see why the prosecutors would choose to put her on the stand and sort of clean up her image that way. But
that's right.
Yeah, it really seems to me like there are a lot of times when women are kind of let off the hook, especially in some of these Southern cases that I've learned about. They dress them up, they talk about their activities in church and things like that. And juries can get swayed by that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really can. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, I heard an interview with you, or it might have been in one of your bonus episodes, where you talked about how you wanted to create a podcast that had more of a narrative arc that followed several different episodes rather than something that did a different story each week. That's not an easy thing to produce. I know that from personal experience because I can't do it very well. But how difficult has it been to research, write, and record the episodes in a way that will keep listeners, kind of on the edge of their seats and waiting to hit play on that next episode?
So, ignorance is bliss is a very good description of all of this because I didn't know what I was doing going into this because I'm not a trained writer, I'm not a trained journalist. Very early when I was doing this, Donald Albright is the CEO of Tenderfoot.
Mhm.
And I had asked Donald if he would work with me as a creative consultant. They do some of the best true crime stories, Up and Vanished, Atlanta Monster. I mean, some really big ones. So I felt very lucky to have Donald on my team as my creative consultant. And he told me, because I'd begun to worry a little bit about how I was going to tell the story. And he said, and it's always stuck with me, I think about it almost every day. He said, create something dope you want to listen to. And I took that to heart because I mentioned Serial, I mentioned S Town. I like the long, immersive stories. They are very hard to produce. And I didn't realize that going into it. But I think also the benefit of me not being formally trained as a writer, I didn't even know what a story arc was. I didn't know what that was. So I have a writer that I work with, and I would stream of conscious write, and he would come behind me and do, we would call it act one, act two, act three.
Mhm.
And so when you listen to it, it is set up that way. But because I don't even know the ending of the story yet. I mean, I'm still writing today. We'll finish writing episode 9. It'll go to episode 10. I don't even know what's in 10 yet. So you can imagine, how do you tell a story without knowing what the ending is? So we just worked on focusing on one episode at a time and making sure we had enough in there, enough cliffhangers that would get you to the next one. Because cliffhangers, to me, the dangling carrots, the cliffhangers, are one of my favorite parts of writing and storytelling. So I think that's what gets people to binge it, is at the end of every episode is always a big cliffhanger. So that was intentional.
Yeah, there is, and the end of episode 6, I think it was, you play some audio, and then that's where the an audio some audio as a teaser, and then that's where the episode ends. And I was like, oh no, what's
Um,
when is this gonna resolve itself? So you did a really good job with that.
Thank you.
In your work developing everything they missed, is there anything the listeners would be surprised to know about your reporting and investigative process?
Well, so I've already let it out of the bag that I don't know what I'm doing. So that would be the first one. And, I say that kind of playfully because I took it very seriously. But I didn't limit myself that because I've never done it before, I can't do it. So I think what the listener hears is a very genuine journey of someone who has never done anything like this before and what I'm uncovering. Any kind of investigation that I've done throughout this has been led purely by instinct. And I think it's that gut instinct that I kept just going after. Okay, who do I need to talk to make that make sense? Okay, I need to talk to this person, or I need to talk to this person. So it was just very instinctual. And part of it was, I need to capture this for the show because I need this interview. But about half the interviews I did were to better understand something I had just learned. So in episode 3, I call it hiding the vegetables and the brownies because you don't realize you've just learned something. Episode 3, there are 3 world renowned experts on false confessions that I put in there purely because I needed to learn about it. And they were so fascinating. And then going back to do something dope you want to hear, I thought, okay, I find that fascinating. So I'm going to put it in there. So everything that you hear is just things that I have thought were really fascinating. So that's how my investigating has gone, purely by gut. My reporting and my storytelling, I've just gone where the story has taken me. And I think um, keeping myself open and not thinking this is what this end of the story is going to be, because the reason for the cliffhanger in episode 6 There was someone that reached out to me a day before the podcast was released. And this person, I never in a million years thought someone like this would reach out to me. It completely changed the trajectory of the whole story. And that's why we're currently on a break right now, because when this person reached out with the information and the knowledge that they have, it completely changed the story. That openness of, I don't know what's going to happen, has really shaped what you'll end up hearing.
So do you think that person sort of caught wind of what you were doing through the grapevine, and then that's why they decided to reach out? Because you hadn't even released the podcast yet, right?
We hadn't released the podcast. This person heard about the Innocence Project taking Andrew's case and didn't like it. And when he reached out to Jason is a very nice, transparent guy and said, well, you're also not going to like this. There's a podcast coming out. So that's how it began. And it's really changed everything about the case, everything.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions I had today. To thank you very much for stopping by and for giving our listeners a little teaser so that they can fully be ready to listen to the podcast if they haven't already. It's a quick listen. I mean, I know that there are 6 episodes right now, but I got through them in like a day and a half because I binged it. It's great investigative work, very inspiring. I mean, and really, it's a noble effort. Trying to help someone in the Innocence Project is always tricky, and it can be heartbreaking, and you just never know which way it's going to go. And that's probably the way Jason feels too, and that's his job.
Yeah, that's right. And right now, sitting here with you, we don't know the story. We don't know the end of the story. We don't know if Andrew will get out. The final episodes will drop mid-January. And I'm my goal is for them to be bingeable, because I had dropped previously one a week. And so my goal is mid-January to drop 7 through 10. And so you'll immediately know how explosive everything was.
Oh, wow. When you've got a lot of work, you're doing a lot of work right now, it sounds like.
Yeah. And as soon as we hang up, I will be too. I'll go straight into a writing session and then recording. Thank you so much.
Yeah. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people and true crime cases profiled on this show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.